Many debates over feminism involve the old question of nature versus nurture. Feminist Frequency has argued in videos, including a two-part video on Lego, that heavily gender stereotyped toys in marketing are harmful to society because of what they teach children. One of the most common responses to Feminist Frequency was the claim that children just naturally have gender-based toy preferences, and thus we should not be surprised that toys are created and marketed the way they are. Essential to most modern feminist theory is a social constructionist view of gender, and Feminist Frequency seems to be operating from this viewpoint. To say that gender is a social construct is to say that it is something that we learn and not something innate in human beings. In other words, there is no biological cause for things like children's toy preferences. With that in mind, let's look at what some of Anita's critics have to say.
The thing about this is, these products interest boys, and certain products interest girls. That's how it is.
Did you ever stop and think that fire engines may be more appealing to boys than girls? And what's stopping girls buying those sets? What's stopping a boy buying the Heart Lake City set?
Little girls were playing with those toys like dolls and stuff because they prefer those toys over boy toys.
Being marketed to the 5 to 7 market because that's where it's still profitable. And as the lower you get, the lower these children's understanding of reality is, and therefore it tends to be more stereotypical of their gender. Like boys are more into lasers and aliens and dragons and these things. Girls are more into pet shops, ice cream, hanging out with their friends.
Marketing, yeah, marketing is going on here. You see, boys tend to like one thing, and women and girls tend to like another thing. There is crisscross, but for the most part, they do test out these toys, and it's what the most girls and the most boys like is what they tend to market to them. The only thing is that if you did like that, you're kind of a unique case, because mostly girls like one thing and boys like the other thing. It's just kind of how we are. Boys tend to be, you know, we're more aggressive in nature, and girls tend to be more non-aggressive in nature. Not to say that they can't do both, but it's just, you know, how we typically act. And that's pretty much what they do to market this. They market to the majority, not the minority.
And that somehow companies are responsible for the differences in males and females, when all they're doing is marketing to the established principles of male and female differences.
What we seem to have here is a nature versus nurture debate, with one side saying nurture and the other side saying nature. I'm of the mind that nature versus nurture arguments must be examined very carefully on a case-by-case basis. Some things clearly are nurture, such as which language we speak. English is a kind of social construct. Some things are almost certainly nature. There could be some debate over the issue, but let's examine the issue in context for a moment. Let me replay one of the clips.
And as the lower you get, the lower these children's understanding of reality is.
Do children really understand what the job of a firefighter entails? Why would it be typical for boys to like fire trucks when they're too young to understand the implications? Is there a liking lasers and aliens gene that only exists on the Y chromosome? The idea that these things are somehow natural sounds kind of absurd, doesn't it? We don't even need to have much of a debate about the biological differences between boys and girls. The roles that these toys are based on are themselves social constructs. Firefighters in ancient Rome were the people that set your property on fire and would only put it out when you had sold it to them at a fire sale price. The reality is that young children are still in the process of learning the basics of reality. And it is adults that create ads, toys, buy toys for their children, as well as encourage or discourage what they like. Even if some part of this were nature, clearly there is a heavy extent of adults providing nurture here. Children don't make toys, they just play with them. Oh wait. While it may seem like children actively desire such toys, there's where conformity comes in. When the majority of social cues children receive tell them to conform to a gender pattern, they will. Boys see other boys playing with Legos and ads and self-identify. Girls see other girls in ads for girly things, and they self-identify. Children also respond to peer pressure of what other children are doing. This is why so many of the ads feature multiple children playing with the toy. It makes it seem as if it's something others will enjoy doing as well. A sad truth of the human condition is that conformity might well be nature. When you teach children to act in stereotypical ways, most of them will, and crossing the gender line is not as easy as people make it out to be. Children are absorbing the worldview taught to them by adults and not necessarily doing what's natural. The idea that little boys just naturally want to play with fire trucks doesn't really make much sense when you stop and think about it.
Why can't girls who want to build those Lego sets just buy the fucking blue box? Rather than make everyone else change, maybe the girls who want to be on an equal block building footing and play with firefighters and police officers should just buy the fucking blue box and stop complaining. Hell, if a boy wants to cook and have a beauty salon, why should the colour of the box matter? He should just buy the fucking Lego set and have fun.
The activities featured in the Friends theme, such as baking, cooking, caregiving, homemaking, decorating, hairstyling, are rooted in deeply stereotypical and limiting roles for women in children's toys, and sadly, in society in general.
She completely forgets that there may be people out there that enjoy cooking, cleaning, and hairstyling. Just because you don't enjoy it doesn't mean everyone else doesn't. And please stop coming up with stupid reasons why people enjoy these activities. Nobody is forcing them to.
If men want to do traditionally girly stuff, and vice versa, then they can do so. Because people all the time overcome these quote-unquote societal pressures. There's this assumption that men and women cannot, or even boys and girls cannot think for themselves and do things they're interested in, regardless of what gender it was intended for.
No. Quit being a hypocrite. Just because we don't, or you're not allowed to do certain things, or you're not allowed to like Lego, like, of course you are. Who's stopping you? Like, of course, like, society doesn't even look down on it. A girl plays with G.I. Joes. Whatever. That's her choice. Whereas, a guy goes and plays with a Barbie, dude gets fucking teased at school and all that shit and yada yada yada. It's basically the other way around now. What more do you feminists want?
The person in this last clip seems to acknowledge that people internalize a gendered value system and that there are negative social repercussions for crossing the gender line. The teasing a boy might receive for playing with a Barbie is part of the way in which people actively police gender boundaries. Is it any wonder then that so many children seem to want the toys they are shown children of their own gender playing with? If it was just a simple matter of children making up their own minds regardless of how something is packaged or marketed, then what they're basically saying is that the marketing is useless. Why bother putting it in pink boxes? Why bother marketing it to a specific gender? Even if you think that children do have natural preferences, would you really describe a child as a rational consumer? Marketing to children is based around getting a child to beg and whine for what they want, because they really aren't rational consumers.
Has dozens of city sub-themes, including search and rescue, police, firefighters, construction, the spaceport, which are all traditionally male-identified occupations.
Because they are male occupations. That being said, I'm not saying girls can't do this. I'm saying 80% of the people in these occupations are men. Because men tend to have a larger bone structure than women. That way, they're more into the hands-on jobs, so they don't get injured as often.
If you want to get a paycheck, then you do your job. Gender does not come into it. And who cares if the people that are willing to risk their lives in burning buildings happen to be male?
Historically speaking, women have been known to do just about every job there is. The physical differences between the average man and the average woman play less of a role in the gender divide of labor than people tend to assume. The fact that men are slightly stronger on average does not really account for such wide gender disparities in the job market. This becomes even more obvious in jobs where muscle power is not a factor. People seem to devote a considerable amount of effort into dismissing the idea that women might still lag behind men because they have only recently begun to be given the same opportunities as men. And so they evoke the idea that every disparity can be explained away by physical differences. This is biased and intellectually lazy. History is rather clear on the point that actual discrimination against women is what gave rise to the gendered division of labor. Take astronauts, for example. Why were the first astronauts all male? Is it because they have bigger bone structure? No. In the early days of NASA, you needed to have a college education and be in the military to be an astronaut. Women's opportunities were limited in both. This is cultural, not biological. The Soviet Union put a woman into space before the United States did. Firefighters do have to be physically strong, but this is a token example, not the general rule. Again, I think people like to distress these sorts of examples because if they admit that not every gender disparity can be explained away this way, then they might be put on the slippery slope of admitting that feminism has some modern relevance. In the nature versus nurture debate, it's easy to overstate the case for nature. Cases of feral children who grew up without any real social contact provide us with an interesting example. If children who grew up deprived of socialization are any indication, then it might well be that most of what we call our humanity is a matter of nurture. These children lack the ability to speak and the ability to learn to speak. They could not grasp concepts like social etiquette and the need for clothes or how to use a toilet. They were essentially no different than animals. However, I should point out that this cuts both ways. Gender is only one aspect of the human experience. At the macro level, there is evidence to suggest that the rabbit hole of the social construct goes much deeper than just gender. In fact, little of what we would call our humanity might be left standing when we brought to light every aspect of our lives that's a social construct. In a sense, nurture is every bit as real as nature. Nurture is nature's way. Gender is not as easily modified or eradicated as some gender feminists seem to hope. Since some people are fond of analogies to the Matrix, gender feminists are like the people trying to hack gender. And so the reactionaries are like the firewalls or the agents in the system. But let's face it, feminist frequency is not exactly Neo stopping bullets. It's more like what she's trying to say is that our current gender construct is a rather rigid and inefficient operating system.